Hey Patreons, in today's video I'm going to show you how I created this meteor shower composite image in Lightroom and Photoshop, and this here is the time-lapse sequence as a video. It was the Geminids meteor shower in December 2018 from La Palma. So basically these are all the images from that sequence. They were taken with a 50mm lens, 10-second shutter speed, f2, ISO 6400. I think there was a 1 or a 2-second gap in between each exposure. And basically what I've done is I've gone through all of the 421 images, and whenever there's a meteor in the frame, I've basically flagged the image. So if you look, some of the boxes have a white box around them with a flag. That lets me know which images now have a meteor in them. So to flag the image, I'm just scrolling with the arrow keys, and then let's say this image had a meteor in it. I would press P for pick, and that flags it as pick. And now I've got the flag with the white box. If you do that on accident, you can just press U for unflag. Now I've got all of the meteor images flagged. So if I come down here to the filter, I can change the filter to flagged, and it tells me that 59 of the 421 photos had meteors. So I guess that's like over 15%, which is pretty insane. But that's the Geminids meteor shower from a dark sky location. So now basically I'm going to composite all of these meteors onto a single base image. And what I've done, I basically took 16 frames from the middle of the time-lapse sequence and I stacked them in Sequitur. And I have a video on YouTube about that already, so I'm not going to go into that into detail. But if you're on a Mac, you want to look into Starry Landscape Stacker. But I basically took 16 images from the middle of the sequence, stacked them for noise reduction. The reason I chose the images from the middle was because of the position of Comet 46P Wirtanen and Pleiades. I wanted them to be, in the middle of the frame. I didn't want them on the edge of the frame or by the horizon. So that's why I chose these 16 images. But I actually stacked another 16 images for the foreground, because if I show you this image, I quite liked it when the telescopes were open and facing towards me. It just makes for a much more interesting foreground. You can actually see them, observing and working away. I felt it was just more of an interesting foreground compared to the telescopes being closed and facing away from me. So I took this sky, this foreground, blended them into this image. Now this is going to be my base image. This is going to be the image that I'm going to put all of the meteors onto. So before I take all of the images into Photoshop, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to put my base image into the same folder, and basically what I want to do is I'm going to do a bit of noise reduction on the single frames with the meteors, and I'm going to use the stacked base as like a reference for the noise reduction. So if I choose this, I'm in the develop module, by the way, and I've got one of the single exposures open, and then if I choose reference view, or you can press shift and R, what I can do is I can now take the base image that I'm going to use as my main image later on. Just going to zoom into 100% on an area where you can see some stars and some foreground, and look, you can see the difference that the stacking has made. It's really got rid of a lot of the noise. It's much more detailed and just really clean and much better looking. But we're going to try and make this look as good as that with Lightroom's noise reduction. So I am basically going to lift the noise reduction quite significantly, and I'm actually going to decrease the contrast because that really helps smoothen things out a little bit. Detail doesn't make a huge difference to the noise that we're trying to get rid of, so it doesn't really matter, but still not as good as the stacked image, obviously. But this will help me blend the meteors on a bit easier when we get to Photoshop. So I'm going to copy the settings from this image that I just edited and paste it to all of the images that have meteors in them. I'm going to do that by pressing Control and A to select all of the images, but then holding Control, I'm going to press on the base image because I don't want to apply any noise reduction to that. Pressing D to go back into develop, and I'm just going to sync all of the images. I've got 59 meteors. I might go through them again and unflag the really small meteors. And then what I'm basically going to do is I'm going to select all of the images, right mouse click, edit in, and then open as layers in Photoshop. If you haven't got a decent PC or laptop, I wouldn't recommend opening the 60 files as layers. I might do it in sort of 10 and then 10 and then 10 and then 10 and build it up that way. But if you've got a good PC, you can just open up all of the 60. So the thing with meteor showers is that they all appear to emanate from a radiant point. If you follow all of the trails backwards, they converge at the same point, the radiant point. The constellation that the radiant point is in is what gives the meteor shower its name. So the Geminids has the radiant point in Gemini, Perseids in Perseus, Orionids in Orion, so on and so forth. The issue, of course, is that the stars, the constellations, and of course the radiant point moves during the course of the night. So in order to have all of the meteors pointing towards the radiant point, you have to align the stars in every image. Now, a much easier way to do this is to shoot from a star tracker rather than a tripod, because that will keep all of the stars in exactly the same place in all of the images. But I'm just going to do it manually here in Photoshop. So, first thing I'm going to do is make sure that the base image is right on the bottom of all my layers, because the meteors are going to go on top of that layer. And I'm going to start turning the visibility of the layers off until I find the exposures that are, or that were taken roughly the same time as the base exposure. So I want, the Comet and Pleiades to be in the middle. So I'm going to start with this one. So I'm going to have to turn off the layer of the visibility of all the other layers apart from the base layer. Okay, and then you can see it was taken just before, basically. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the blend mode of this layer to difference, and then basically whenever there's a difference between the two layers, you'll see white pixels. Whenever the two layers are the same, you see black pixels. So you can already see the two comets there, not aligned, two versions of Pleiades, that star there. So I'm just going to move this layer until the stars are aligned, and I know the stars are aligned when things start turning black, basically. So I'm going to get the comet lined up, and I might rotate just a tiny bit by pressing Control and T. Oh, I did not want to resize. So yeah, it's going to be difficult to get all of the stars lined up, but as long as most of the ones in the middle pretty much lined up. If the radiant point of the meteor shower was in the image, you can just rotate the images around the radiant point and it's a little bit easier. But anyway, I'm going to turn the layer blending mode back to normal, and I'm going to create a layer mask on this layer. I'm going to zoom into the meteor and take in a black brush. So I'm going to press B for brush, or you can choose brush there. Make sure you got black as your foreground layer. Mode is on normal, opacity 100%, and the softness, or the hardness even, I want it to be on 0%, nice soft brush. The size is going to depend on your meteor. You basically want it to just cover the meteor. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit more. Something around there, I guess, will be good for that one. Just going to zoom out. And I'm basically going to press at the one end And then holding shift, I'm going to click at the other end. And you see how that meteor has disappeared. I'm going to do the same for this one. This is going to take a bigger brush. That's a nice little fireball there. I'm just going to press at that end and holding shift, I'm going to click at the other end. What that does is it basically draws a straight line. So you can see, click at one end, hold shift and click at the other end, and it draws a straight line with the brush. So what I'm going to do now is, with the layer mask active and selected, I'm going to press Control and I. That inverts the mask, and then the meteors come back. So the mask is now pretty much all black, apart from 2 lines that we did for the meteors. And let's do that for the next image. This one here, change the blend mode to difference. Use the move tool just to move this layer around. So just lining up the comet with the comet. Pleiades. So this one needs a little bit of rotation as well, just to get a little bit of a better match. Yeah, somewhere around there. So you see, you have a bit of a black patch there, so I know that the stars around the meteor are lined up pretty well. Could even move with the arrow keys just to get a nice fine tune. There we go. Change the mode back to normal. I'm going to add a layer mask, make sure I've got a black brush. Can reduce the size because this is a smaller meteor. Start at that end and invert the mask when I'm finished. Now I'm basically going to do a bunch of these, mainly the ones that are close to the base image, and then obviously there's going to be a point where if I align the stars, the meteor is going to be falling on the foreground or the outside of the frame. So those I'm going to take a bit of a creative license, but I'll show you that once I've sort of got most of the possible meteors on, because they will create guidelines to make sure that the other meteors are pointing back towards the radiant point. So I'm just going to skip forward now. Alright guys, I'm getting there slowly but surely. It's starting to build up nicely now. You can see all of the meteors are pointing back towards the radiant point. I'm just on this image here. You can see that meteor on the top right there. If I change to difference, you'll see the comet is there. If I bring it up to line it up with that comet there, that meteor is being pushed off the frame. So when it gets to this point, I just kind of take a bit of a creative license and just sort of bring it back down to a position in the frame. And then you can just rotate that meteor just to make sure that it points in the same direction as all of these. So I've got all of these as guiders now for all the other meteors. So yeah, I'm just gonna position that one there and just do the same that I was doing before with the layer mask, followed by a black brush, starting there, coming up to the tail end, and then inverting the mask. And if it doesn't blend nicely, you can just sort of use a bit of a soft brush, maybe lower the opacity, and just kind of blend those ends a little nicer. Something like that looks fine. And I'm just going to keep going until I've still got loads left, but I'm just going to keep going until I've got all the meteors onto a single image.